Well, good morning. The country and the county are waking up today to an historic vote in the EU referendum. The country has voted to leave, and Kent certainly did too. I'm joined now by Paul Francis, the KM's political editor. We're going to talk about that big result, what's happened since, how Kent voted. We're going to have some interviews from the various different counts as well, and try and wade through all of the different scenarios that now face the country. So Paul, first of all, the big result, 52%, the country have said leave. What have you made of it?
Well, it was an extraordinary night, and I know these words like seismic are sometimes overused, but it really was a momentous night in politics, which is turning into an equally momentous day, as we'll no doubt talk about. So the Vote Leave campaign started the evening thinking that they'd just been edged out by the Remain camp. Lots of swings throughout the night, and eventually it became clear that the Vote Leave campaign had actually managed to score a fairly narrow but nevertheless distinct victory.
Because last night the bookies were saying, odds on that Remain were going to win. You get odds as long as 10-1 last night, which is huge. There was more chance of England winning the Euros, which is looking ironic. But that could happen. Yeah. Who knows?
Well, they do say follow the money, and the bookmakers are generally right on the money. But on this occasion, they were proved wrong, as were the pollsters again. And I think there's going to be another inquest into how the polling companies managed to get it wrong yet again. But it really was an extraordinary night. And in Kent, where the battle has been particularly intense, some surprises across the counties there, with only one area, Tunbridge Wells, voting to remain in the EU. All the other areas, all the other districts voting reasonably comprehensively to quit.
And you followed it throughout in the county, and we've seen all the big players down here. There was going to be a late visit from the Leave camp, but that didn't materialise with what happened to the MP Joe Cox. But what was the feeling like from those various campaigners who came down? We had Jeremy Hunt down here, we had Nigel Farage, you're driving around on a bus with him. We had various different campaigners down here. Was that feeling that there was some momentum that the Leave campaign could get this result?
Well, I sensed at the outset that the Leave camp felt they had an outside chance of securing victory. They weren't saying that they were definitely going to win, but they felt that there was all to play for, and that's why you saw a number of these VIP visits in the last few days of the campaign, with Farage taking to his open-top bus to travel around the coast of Kent from Ramsgate to Sittingbourne. And I think there was a sense, as the campaign entered its final kind of days, that the Leave camp felt it could have an outside chance. My sense also was that for the Remain camp, they seemed at the outset reasonably confident that they would win. And I think that they managed to continue that feeling throughout the campaign. But you did get a sense that they were getting a bit nervous. George Osborne coming down, unleashing his Brexit budget, saying it'd have to be an emergency budget where we had all sorts of horrors like tax rises, cancellation of big projects like the Dartford Crossing if we left. And there was definitely a kind of late attempt to kind of make sure they could shore up their support.
And we heard the big news only an hour or so ago, well, less than an hour ago. David Cameron, the Prime Minister, will stand down as Prime Minister by October. Now, we discussed this before we came on. He said as Prime Minister, not as leader.
Yes, very
Is there anything we can read into that?
Well, he made the point that he was standing down as Prime Minister and wanted a replacement in place by October, not standing down as leader of the Conservative Party. And I think a lot of people will be interpreting that in different ways. Obviously, Labour will say, well, if there's going to be a new Prime Minister, then we need an election. But I don't think anyone saw this coming at all, even though the result had gone against David Cameron, who triggered the referendum in the first place. So he bore some responsibility for that. He made quite a dignified statement, I think, outside Downing Street, but it was obviously from the start a legacy statement, and he knew what was coming. So another momentous event in the last 24 hours.
So let's go through some of the figures for Kent. So we had a poll a couple of weeks before yesterday's vote. We had Kent leaving 57% overall.
Yeah.
The results actually had Kent saying 59% of all the districts saying for us to leave. 41% remain. There was just shy of a million voters. So first of all, let's take the turnout. What did you make of the turnout there, Paul?
Well, I think it was very interesting that the turnout was so high. I think the reason it was so high was that people thought this was a referendum in which their vote actually counted. You could say that in Kent a lot of the time the votes that are cast by individuals don't make a jot of difference to who gets elected. This is very different. Every vote counted, and I think that's why you saw such a big turnout, and also because it's a massive issue for a lot of people, worried about immigration, worried about the impact on local services in Kent. So I think that explains why there was an enthusiasm for voting, which sometimes you don't see.
Mm-hmm. And just the one district saying Remain. One that I think you were quite surprised about was Sevenoaks as well. We were expecting it's Tunbridge Wells who voted to Remain. 35,676 Tunbridge Wells said to Remain, 28,320 to leave. And Sevenoaks was 38,000 to leave, 32,000 to Remain.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by that result?
Well, I think what our poll showed when we carried out this poll was that there was a fairly east-west split. So the kind of western area of the county, arguably the more kind of affluent, prosperous areas, were more enthusiastic about staying in the EU. And that included Sevenoaks, and you'd imagine Sevenoaks to be that kind of area where they would be more Euro enthusiastic, but it turned out that they weren't after all, and Tunbridge Wells, sometimes referred to as, disgusted at Tunbridge Wells, was on this occasion the only area in which they supported the Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm. And what about now? What do you think the government, the different parties need to do to unite the country? Because there's God knows how many millions of people who have voted to Remain. They've not got what they wanted. Lots of uncertainty. What do you think the government needs to do?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I think there's obviously an attempt now to stabilise things so that the economy is not damaged. There's obviously a lot of turbulence in the markets. The value of the pound slumping and on the decline. So the first priority in terms of sending out a message to the rest of the world is that the country is taking steps to minimise the turbulence. And we just had a statement from Mark Carney about the steps, the contingency steps that the Bank of England may take. So that will be the first priority. Then who knows?
And what about at a local level? Is there anything that we can do to come together?
Well, I think it was interesting to hear David Cameron in his speech saying that there had to be a way found to ensure that the country did not fall apart, not become divisive. And the referendum campaign has been very divisive. It's going to take time to see whether the kind of wounds are long-lasting or whether they're just scratches and grazes in the political debate. But I think Kent is obviously an area where the impact of these things like migration has played an extremely important part in people's minds, and I think they'll want to see some action now that they voted leave. I think the challenge for politicians is to actually deliver what they said they would deliver if there was a vote to go out of the European Union.
I think something that is quite clear by figures is that the younger generation have pretty much, I think it was 75% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted to Remain. At the University of Kent, have been very vocal that they were in. They supported the Remain campaign, and if the vote had been done, or had been done in a few years' time, that it may be a very different result. What about the young people who have voted to Remain? Do you think that they've got cause to be concerned? How can they get behind a country?
They might feel a bit shortchanged, but we are where we are, and the demographics are in a county like Kent. There are probably more people over the age of 55 than other parts of the county, and they are the sort of people who've got these concerns about migration, don't like what they see as the negative impacts of influx of people from different countries. So I think that's just where we are in terms of the demographics of the county.
Okay, we're going to now see a couple of interviews. I think we're going to start with an interview from the Thanet Count.
I find it very disappointing, and I'm not disappointed for me, I'm disappointed for the country. And I'm disappointed for my children, and I'm disappointed for future generations, because this isn't something that can be put right in 5 years, or 10 years, or 20 years. This is it.
So there he was explaining my point there. So now we haven't heard from Boris Johnson yet.
No.
Have you had any calls, anything from any of the MPs from around the county?
Well, I think what's happened is that overnight, obviously, like all of us were staying up, monitoring the results, reporting on what was happening. MPs probably thought they'd just grab a quick couple of hours kip, have a little bit of a sleep, digest the results, and now, of course, there's been this new development with David Cameron announcing that he's going to stand down as Prime Minister. So we're on to a new set of discussions and conversations, and as yet, MPs are keeping their counsel on this particular issue. And I think partly because they are genuinely so shocked by what has happened. It really is a kind of a seismic moment in politics.
And there will be a leadership battle. Is there anyone from Kent who can realistically throw their name into the hat?
I'd say probably not at this stage. I think Kent has traditionally been split between Europhile MPs and Eurosceptic MPs. I don't see anyone who's at this stage of their career who's likely to throw their hat into the ring. I think it will come down to one of these big hitters like Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, and you never know, someone from outside like Philip Hammond may throw his hat into the ring. Often with leadership contests, it's not the person you expect to become leader who does become leader.
We're going to hear another interview from last night, this time from an out campaigner in Shepway.
We had a lot of people, a lot of feedback throughout Kent saying that lots of people wanted to leave, so we're confident. And I think it's going to be a quiet revolution.
Yeah, go on, you.
So we all know somebody down here in Kent, big name, been a big name in the Leave campaign, well not the Leave campaign, but trying to leave Europe. Nigel Farage, this is his legacy, or he'll call it his legacy. How does he stand politically now?
Well, you know he's the Marmite. He's the classic Marmite politician. As many people like him as loathe him, but there's absolutely no doubt that he has engineered a situation in which the UK has been given a choice on what he sees as the most fundamental issue that the country faces, whether to be part of a single political institution across lots of different member states, different European countries, or whether the UK can go it alone. And I think he will feel vindicated by this result. Interestingly, he started the evening off by suggesting that he knew that the Leave camp had lost. Within about half an hour, he'd recanted on that and said maybe that wasn't the case. And I think genuinely he's going to be absolutely delighted at what the outcome has been.
But do you think we'll ever see him in Parliament? Do you think he'll get a
Well, that's an issue. What happens to UKIP now? In a sense, they've got what they wanted, which is a vote and a vote to leave. So you could argue, what is the point of UKIP now? Where does UKIP go? And I think that's going to be an interesting issue. Will it still have this support that it's established in Kent, or will people say, well, they've got what they wanted, we don't really know what else UKIP stands for other than getting out of the European Union? So what does the party have to do to maintain its kind of presence in the county and its other stronghold areas? That's a whole new challenge for the party and for Nigel Farage. It'd be very interesting to see what Nigel Farage actually decides to do now. He may decide, he's been at the front line of UKIP for many, many years now. He may decide that it's time to throw in the towel, but you never get that sense. He likes being in the thick of the action, Nigel does.
And we've seen the pound take a bit of a battering this morning, a very volatile market as well. And we were hearing that the banks their shares are plummeting, as are builders. Lots of building work goes on in Kent, lots of new builds companies. How do you think that could affect this?
Well, I think there's always been an acceptance that there's going to be some financial turmoil in the short term. I think what will become worrying if the short term turns into the mid-term to the long term. So that is why it's imperative for the country to ensure, and for the government and the Bank of England together, to ensure that any financial turbulence is limited and it's short term. I think there will be issues if there's a sense in which the Bank of England are going to not get into grips with this turbulence. So I think we're going to see some steps on that front.
Quick word on Labour in Kent. Obviously, Labour's not had a great history here.
Well, not entirely true.
Well, in recent times.
In recent times.
In recent times. What about Jeremy Corbyn? Where does he stand in all of this, and where does the party stand?
Well, he was criticised by a lot of people in his own party for having a fairly half-hearted campaign. He kind of latterly decided that the party's position was that the UK should stay in Europe. They didn't really have a particularly dynamic campaign. Still lots of questions about his leadership. I think the problem for Labour in Kent particularly is that they've seen their kind of core supporters drift off to UKIP in recent years, and they still haven't managed to find a way in which they can recapture that kind of support. What does Labour need to do to recapture this? Well, I don't think they know the answer to that.
It's very interesting as well looking at our neighbours. Look at Brighton, for example. It was 69% in. London, hugely in. Why has Kent been so divided?
Well,
why is it so different?
I think one of the features of Kent is as a peninsula county, the gateway to Europe, where the port of Dover is. It has been on the front line in terms of these issues around immigration and the influx of migrants and asylum seekers. We saw it last year with Operation Stack gridlocking the county for 29 days or so, and that was directly related to the activities over in Calais where migrants were trying to get on board HGVs and trains to make their way to Kent. So Kent has been at the sharp end, at the coalface, if you like, of some of these very contentious issues. And I think that's why you will see this difference between the county and places like Brighton and kind of urban, more metropolitan areas. And we've seen in London great support for staying in the EU, but as soon as you come into Kent, the coastal towns, considerable opposition.
We're going to have a few more interviews now. We'll play them back to back for you. They're again from all the various polling stations from last night. So let's see what the various people were thinking whilst those counts were going on.
Whilst many of us don't have perhaps stocks and shares, we do have pension funds, we do have businesses that are employing people and supplying our livelihood. So that's what's worrying me in terms of what the outcome is. If it's very narrow, it could lead to instability.
It's a huge decision this country has taken, bigger than any general election or any local election. And my concern is what comes next if we are to leave the European Union.
It seems to be all Scotland and London. The rest of the country seems to be out. And you can't have a country run when only two parts of it actually want to be in the EU. And
we've got quite a few of you watching, and I'll just give you a few of the comments. Lots of them are positive about the result. Sherry Harper says, about time we got out. Debbie Baldwin says, onwards and upwards, great news. So, Paul, do you think MPs really are in touch with their constituents?
Well, this is one of the interesting features of the poll we did. We tried to draw out from the opinion survey that we had commissioned whether people were likely to vote with their head and their heart. And it's very interesting matching up their views with what MPs were saying. And in fact, there were a majority of Kent MPs wanted the UK to remain in Europe. I think it was 10 as opposed to 6 who wanted to get out. Now, in all but one area, MPs seemed not to be in step or in tune with their own constituents. In Ashford, Damien Green, very pro-European MP, saw the area vote quite emphatically to leave the European Union, as did Damien Collins in Folkestone and Shepway. He backed staying in, saw his constituents vote largely to get out, as did the Dover MP Charlie Elphick, who surprised some people by saying that he was going to support staying in at the outset. Again, in that particular area, his constituents, possibly for understandable reasons, decided that it wasn't for them to stay in the UK.
Well, Paul, I think we'll probably...
In the EU, I beg your pardon.
Well, exactly. I think we'll leave it there for now. We'll keep bringing you all the various reaction throughout the day. It has been a momentous evening, a momentous campaign, and it's going to be a time of change for the country. But for now, we'll leave you and have a great day.